The Nature of True Prayer by Rawson. Chapter 12, Personal and Impersonal Treatment. I am continually being asked whether it is right to treat for a person without their consent. The reason for this is that the Christian Science practitioners refuse to treat a person without their consent. In fact, they think it absolutely wrong to do such a thing. There is a very sound reason for this. Some years ago, the regular method at Christian Science classes was to teach the student to think of the spiritual reality of the patient. That is to say, to think of the patient as an absolutely perfect being in heaven. This I call personal treatment, to distinguish it from the method which I have always adopted of not thinking of the person at all, but trying to realize as clearly as I can the facts in connection with God and man specifically, namely God's infinite consciousness. When working in this way, one is not treating for the patient, but treating oneself, that is, treating for the patient. The evolution of divine healing. It has to be recognized that divine healing has been a matter of steady growth. At one time I was told it was the practice to sit back to back, imagining in some way there was an electric current passing from one spine to the other. This probably came from the old idea which Mesmer enunciated, namely, that electricity flowed to the patients from the tips of his fingers and healed them. Later on, people used the human mind and thought of a perfect human being whom they located in heaven. They thought, for instance, of a perfect heart or a perfect leg, as the case may be, not recognizing that the mere fact of thinking of outline, shape, and form, as material beings know them, as existing in heaven, did not get away from the material, limited concept of man. Whenever you are thinking of the material world, you are thinking of evil, and evil invariably follows. I remember once being asked to treat for one of the well-known lecturers and practitioners, not a Christian Scientist, who could not get away from her own troubles. After a short talk, I told her that her difficulty was that she was still on a material basis. This she indignantly denied. I then asked her how she would treat for a person who had a weak heart. She answered, I would turn in thought to heaven, and I would realize a perfect man with an absolutely perfect heart, having all power and strength and beating rhythmically. Any result gained in this way is purely hypnotic and the result of the action of the human mind. It is not true healing at all, as some trouble must come back later on. As I have pointed out in Life Understood, the heart is the reflection of God as love, and love is omnipotent, for God is love. The sufficiently clear realization of this would instantly cure any weak heart in the world, not because you have done anything, but because you have got right away from the matter and material things, allowing, from a theological point of view, the action of God to take place and destroy the evil that was the cause of the trouble. In the case mentioned, the result of working the wrong way was that, knowing the effect of thought, directly the symptoms of any trouble arose. The patient could not get away from worrying over the trouble, neither could she think in the way she did, as above mentioned, of a perfect organ in heaven. Fear kept on intruding. Instead of getting away altogether from the material world and thinking only of God, of absolute good, she had an intense fear of what was going to happen. She knew all the symptoms of the various diseases, and directly she had a twinge in any particular part, she was sure that some particular disease was starting to attack her. Not being able to think of the perfection of that particular organ or limb, she was certain that the trouble was coming. It was a pitiable sight. She was a clever, loving woman, and yet wrong mental working had brought her to this state. Fortunately, she soon got over her troubles. This is the nature of evil, to bring about its own destruction. Personal treatment. Later on, when the Christian scientists began to understand Mrs. Eddy's writings, there was a considerable advance made, and people did their best to think of the spiritual reality of the patient, free from any limited material ideas. In the year 1901, when I was investigating Christian Science for the Daily Express, as far as I know, practically everyone was working in the old way, and I certainly discussed the question with the principal workers. Some of them were even on a much more material basis than this. I remember asking one of the practitioners, who was librarian at the time, for a book when she replied that she could not attend to me as she was afraid that she would miss her train. I then replied that I hoped that she had reversed this. She said, "Of course I did. If it is right, I shall catch my train." I could not make her see that this latter thought was not true prayer and had solely a hypnotic effect. The only result was that she told others that I did not understand Christian Science. The true method of working is to realize that man never misses any train. He is always in the right place and goes instantly from idea to idea. It is always wrong to think in any way of the material world except to deny its existence. Impersonal treatment. Lately, since it has been made so very clear that one should not think of the person at all, but should think solely of God in heaven, or of the ideal man, many of the Christian scientists have fortunately changed their method of working and are treating in what I call an impersonal way. I hope that soon they will begin to realize in their treatments the spiritual realities of the different parts of the body. An article has appeared in one of their papers saying that all treatment is impersonal and that there is no such thing as personal treatment. I have found on cross-examination of their practitioners that even the leaders have not really got clearly in their minds the difference between what I call personal and impersonal treatment. In any case, the expressions are useful so as to discriminate between what I call the highest and the inferior method of divine healing. The objection to personal treatment, as it has been defined above, is that when you are treating, you have a sort of sense of the mentality of the patient, and this sense may develop into an actual mechanical action upon the human consciousness of the individual thought of. This happens when a person thinks of the human patient instead of the ideal spiritual man, and thinks so vividly that he actually sees the material face or even the material body. This may be called picturing and corresponds to the black magic mentioned by Ezekiel in chapter 8:12, where he says, "Hast thou seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the chambers of his imagery?" The punishment of these men is shown in verses 2 and 8 of the succeeding chapter. And that was chapter 12, Personal and Impersonal Treatment. Join us next time for chapter 13, The Movement of Matter. See you then.